That's Nick.
And that's Joseph. And today we're here to talk about Babylon. The fifth film from Damien Chazelle, which will be released December 23rd, 2022, courtesy of Paramount.
Do I know Damien's other films?
Yeah, I'd say so. Well, you know La La Land,
Okay.
his third film. I'm a little cool on La La Land, mostly because of the overzealous reception it received for a film that I thought was just okay. I thought First Man, which also featured Ryan Gosling, his last film, while technically a marvel, I thought was very dull. But I am quite a fan still of Whiplash, his 2014 film, which won J.K. Simmons Best Supporting Actor. So I walked into Babylon with probably very low expectations. It's 3 hours and 8 minutes. It took me about half an hour because it does skirt on the surface level before this kind of descent into hell, if you will. But I really quite like this film, and maybe I'm also primed for it because of the particular subject matter it's dealing with as well.
The basic story is 1920s Hollywood.
Specifically, 1926 Bel Air.
Sort of this. We focus on four people, and it's sort of the excess and hedonism that we find in this environment that leads to their rise and fall. Specifically related to the transition from silent film to talkies, and of the four main people to die at the end.
God. Yeah, that is in a nutshell. Guests weren't allowed at this.
I wasn't allowed to watch this movie, but you really liked it.
I did. Again, I can't say enough how much I really wasn't looking forward to seeing it, despite also a equally extravagant cast.
Can we start with the four main people?
Sure. So, it's in it, and we meet all four of them who intersect in this extended opening sequence at this Bacchanalian for an actor named John Conrad, played by Brad Pitt, who's kind of. All of them are there are real people featured in the periphery, like Irving Thalberg, for instance, but the principals are amalgamations of people you might recognize snippets of from the period. So John Conrad is kind of like Louis Gilbert and Douglas Fairbanks Jr.
Okay.
Then there's Margot Robbie as Nellie Leroy, who's a new up-and-comer who's virtually a nobody that wheedles her way into this party and becomes an overnight sensation, basically. And then there is Manny Torres, who's kind of a laborer / errand boy and becomes as he calls it, a studio executive at a studio called Kinoscope, which is basically Paramount, played by Diego Calva, who has been in Narcos Mexico, but this is kind of a star-making turn for him. And then the fourth person is Joven Adepo as Sidney Palmer, who's a trumpet player. Think, Louis Armstrong of this period. And of the four, he's probably the least well-served, but does serve his purpose to kind of show a very brief period of progressiveness, I think, in this Hollywood machine.
Okay.
So then there's Gene Smart as a Llewellyn Parsons / Hedda Hopper type gossip journalist. There's a whole bunch of notables. Olivia Wilde's in one scene, Catherine Waterston, Max Minghella, Samara Weaving, Lucas Haas, Spike Jonze, Flea, Rory Scovel, Jeff Garlin, and coming in notably in the third act is Tobey Maguire as kind of a criminal underlord.
So Brad Pitt is a big star.
Mm-hmm. It's basically about how this created the template of the star system that we know. These were the silent gods, and then when we transitioned to sound, a lot of these people didn't make it, and there was this rash of suicides and people like accidental deaths that also coincide with the Great Depression starting in 1929. And of course, The Jazz Singer was 1927. So this takes place from 26 to 30 with one cap end in 1952, where Chazelle really delivers that he is turning Singin' in the Rain inside out. The 1952 classic with Gene Kelly, directed by Stanley Donen, which is about the same transition period.
Did you explain Brad Pitt?
Yes.
Oh, so he's a big star for them.
He's this first major big star who's paves the way for somebody like Clark Gable as his star wanes, because this character does two talkies and is kind of laughed at like a lot of them were.
Because he's not a good actor in
Yes,
that way.
yes, because it's a totally different style of acting.
And then Margot Robbie is sort of discovered, and so the film's showing how quickly her rise to fame could happen in that environment.
Right, and I think she's mostly modeled after Clara Bow, who is the original It Girl for a film called It. But as I was watching her, I felt a lot of Joan Crawford, whose real name was Lucille Lesueur, like Leroy, and who had a similar, was kind of pimped out by her parents, her mother, and Eric Roberts plays Margot Robbie's dad here. But how Nellie is discovered by this female director that's actually Chazelle's wife. And it reminded me very much of Dorothy Arzner's obsession with Joan Crawford. And again, I think there are bits and pieces that are being borrowed from heavily all across the board.
Okay, and then the trumpet player.
The trumpet player, not only with sound, but lighting. Like there's all these, as they called them, race pictures at the time, in a short wave, and this is a star that's fostered by Manny Torres, who again has also wheedled his way up in the studio and is trying to push this star forward because he realizes there's an audience for that. And his kind of final hurrah is they make him put on blackface because they don't know how to light black skin, and to play in the South he has to appear as black as everybody else in this picture, and he looks too light under the light, and he decides not to be a sellout and is really the only true survivor, I think, at the end. You also have Lee Jun Lee playing a woman named Lady Fei Zhu, who's very much Anime Wong. She has this delicious moment in the early party sequence that's very much Marlene Dietrich from Morocco. It's a film that's very excessive, which I think Chazelle is even showcasing with. It is like a vulgar spectacle at first. There's shit, there's piss, there's blood. In excess across the board, and there are a handful of just kind of phenomenal scenes.
Like what?
One of the I think the point where I started to get into the film is, the Jazz Singers opened, and the Dorothy Arzner type character has cast Nellie in her first sound film, and the 8 or 9 takes they have. That showcase all the things they didn't think about, how there can be no air conditioning because it makes too much noise, everybody has to wear rubber soles, everything has to be absolutely perfect to get just this 2-minute sequence in this film they're shooting, and they take so long that the cinematographer dies. Or there's another early scene where I think we get this mix of a D.W. Griffiths and Joseph von Sternberg type, and that's where Manny has to go rush off to Los Angeles to get a camera because they break all of them, and somebody gets accidentally murdered in this battle sequence. So I think just showcasing how this is really, Hollywood in the early days was the Wild West. Like there were no rules. Everything was so excessive, and people really were living larger than life. That as the Depression hit, and this, the Legion of Decency and the Hollywood Production Code started putting this moral template on things. These people, there were multiple reasons people just kind of withered. Anyway, another scene, Jean Smart has a great monologue where she's basically telling Brad Pitt's character that he's had his heyday, and but generations from now people will remember him every time they run this celluloid through the machine, and he'll be remembered along with all the other angels and ghosts of the period. He calls her demeaningly a cockroach, and she's like, well, cockroaches are the watchers, and if Hollywood is a house that's on fire, you're stuck inside and you'll burn to death, but the cockroaches go into the dark. There's another really kind of chaotic slapstick almost scene that's something out of Howard Hawks, really, like Bringing Up Baby. I think I thought of where Margot Robbie has a rattlesnake attached to her neck, and Lee Jun Lee has to suck the venom out, and then where Tobey Maguire comes in at the end is this mobster who looks very gross and sickly, takes Diego Calva's Calva into what he calls the asshole of Los Angeles, because also the party scene has also kind of moved underground. These people that kind of can't give up their habits, and kind of how there's this weird perverted underbelly that's been created because of this. Sorry, it's hard. There are so many things. Like, it's just a spectacle, I think, that needs to be seen. And I understand that talking about it without you seeing it is probably laborious, but I don't know. I was actually really impressed and very interested in a lot of things about how this machine, builds people up only to tear them down. As in, we're just all born to die. But in reality, how these silent gods, once they speak, how we were all, able to pick them apart. They were made more human.
Well, to sort of wrap up the story, so Brad Pitt ends up killing himself?
Yes.
Because he knows that he's kind of done.
Yes.
Margot Robbie is her relationship with the black trumpet player, or no.
With Manny Torres.
Sorry.
He's trying to help her, and she's kind of her own.
But he's gotten into trouble with like some bad guys.
He is trying to help her pay
she owes money.
A gambling debt to some very vicious men, and that's what Tobey Maguire is, and inadvertently gives him play money from the set of a film.
Okay.
And at that party that I mentioned, all of that kind of goes to bits, and almost all of them get murdered. He tries to abscond with Nellie, but she realizes that she's toxic for him and walks off into the night, and later we learn she's died.
And then what about Manny?
Manny, they spare him and tell him he has to get out of Los Angeles, and so that's when the film cuts to 1952. He comes back with a wife and kid and stumbles into Singing in the Rain, and has a teary sequence where he realizes that was, the life that he left behind with some of those exact experiences. And then there's an explosion, this montage of cinematic moments that Chazelle has put together, everything from, Buñuel, Passion of Joan of Arc, through Avatar, of just the wonderful visual spectacle that is filmmaking.
And what about the trumpet player?
The trumpet player, we just get a scene of him going back to playing in the bar circuit.
Okay.
So again, the most peripheral of those four, but also maybe the least able to peddle his craft.
What else you got there?
I don't know. There's probably a lot to be talked about, but if you're a fan of any of those people I mentioned, they get kind of shout outs and references in very interesting and intriguing ways that I feel like I haven't seen so passionately rendered in a long time. And of course, if you're a fan of Singing in the Rain, they actually staged that 1929 rendition of that song that Gene Kelly is doing. So it's very Singing in the Rain, Inside Out / meta. I think Margot Robbie, this should have been the film that's called Once Upon a Time in Hollywood, because those two, both she and Brad Pitt starred in that film. And again, you have another sequence of her watching herself like she did when she was Sharon Tate. But it just works, to me, better in this film. And I was worried at first that she'd be a little too much like her Amsterdam character, which is also very zany and all over the place, and in a decade not far off from here. But yeah, I was very pleased with everybody in it.
What would you give it?
I would give it 4.
Out of 5. Mm-hmm. Anything else?
I'm sure there is that I'm going to kick myself for missing out on
Well,
speaking
you know
about,
what?
but...
We will follow up on the podcast.
Okay.
Hit the thanks button. Listen to our podcast. Bye.